Hello and welcome back to Ganga Education. On this platform, you will find quality lectures relating to the field of law, competitive examination in legal domain, important legal facts and legal history, all explained in clear and structured manner.
In today's lecture, we are going to discuss section 28 to 32 of Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam 2023.
Have you ever wondered if a simple note in a shopkeeper's logbook is enough to prove you owe them money? Well, today, we're diving deep into the law that answers that exact question. We're talking about Section 28 of India's New Evidence Act, a rule that's all about how account books are used in court. So let's jump right in with a classic scenario, one that the law itself practically gives us. Imagine a local business owner, let's call him A, sues a customer, B, for 1,000 rupees. And his only piece of evidence? Just a single line he wrote himself in his own ledger. And this brings us to the million-dollar question, right? In a court of law, is that one self-made entry actually enough to prove the debt? Can you really hold someone liable based on nothing more than your own records? Well, Section 28 has a very, very clear answer. Okay, so how does the law tackle this? The answer is right there in the text of Section 28, what many people call the account book rule. Now, this is where the law does something really brilliant. First, it says, yes, an entry in a properly kept business account book is relevant. A court is absolutely going to look at it. But then, and this is the key, it adds a huge safeguard. That entry alone is not sufficient to prove someone is liable.
So, in plain English, that book entry needs backup. And in legal terms, that backup is called corroborative evidence. We're talking about extra independent proof that supports the story the ledger is telling. Think about things like a signed invoice, maybe a delivery receipt, or even someone who can testify they saw the whole transaction go down.
For a court to even start considering that book entry as evidence, it has to pass 4 key tests. You can think of these as the 4 pillars that hold the whole argument up. So here's the checklist. First, there has to be a genuine book of accounts. Second, it has to be a record that's regularly kept. Not some diary you scribbled the night before the court case. Third, the entry has to be directly relevant to the dispute. And fourth, the law just hammers this point home. Even if you pass all those tests, it's still not enough by itself. Now, this isn't just theory from a law book. Let's take a look at how India's Supreme Court has actually interpreted and applied this rule in some really important cases over the years.
A really foundational case, one that lawyers always refer back to, is Chandradhar Goswami versus Gauhati Bank. This one pretty much set the stage for how we understand the account book rule today.
And in this case, the Supreme Court drew a line in the sand. It confirmed the principle loud and clear. While account book entries are absolutely useful, they must have independent supporting proof to actually establish liability. All right, now let's fast forward a few decades. The same principle was put to the test in a really high-profile case, CBI versus VC Shukla. And what's interesting here is that the evidence wasn't even a formal business ledger. It was entries made in private diaries. And guess what? The court was totally consistent. This ruling proved that the principle holds true even for more informal records, like personal diaries. Without that other evidence to back it up, an entry by itself just doesn't prove a thing.
So, where did this rule come from? Well, it's got a really long history, and it's evolved from an era of dusty paper ledgers to the world of digital spreadsheets we live in today.
Believe it or not, the core idea we're discussing is nothing new. It actually started out as Section 34 of the Indian Evidence Act way back in 1872. For over 150 years, this principle has been a bedrock of Indian law, and it's been carried forward right into the new 2023 Act. So if you look at the old law versus the new one, the section number changed from 34 to 28, but the core principle, it's identical. But there is one absolutely crucial update for the 21st century. The new law now explicitly says it applies to records maintained in an electronic form. It's finally officially recognizing that today's ledgers are made of pixels, not just ink.
There's an old legal maxim in Latin that just perfectly captures the spirit of this law. It says, external acts indicate internal intentions. The best way to think about it is this. The account book entry, that's the external act. It's a clue. But to know the internal truth of what really happened, the court needs more proof.
All right, let's bring it all together. Why is this rule so important? What does this legal balancing act really mean for businesses, for lawyers, for pretty much anyone involved in a financial deal?
Honestly, Section 28 is a masterclass in legal fairness. On one hand, it's incredibly practical. It recognizes that businesses run on their books, and it allows those records to be seen by a court. But on the other hand, it's a powerful shield that protects all of us from fraud. It stops someone from just writing a fake debt in a diary and then using that to make a claim against you. It forces people to bring real independent proof to the table.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating question for the future, doesn't it? The law has managed to adapt from paper to pixels. But as accounting gets more and more automated by AI and transactions are permanently recorded on things like blockchain, what are courts going to consider independent corroboration? The core principle will always be there, but what counts as proof is going to keep on evolving.
We're going to dive right into a really important piece of India's new evidence law today. We're talking about Section 29 of the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam. Now, this is the rule that, kind of behind the scenes, gives everyday official documents the real power in a court of law. And you're about to see exactly how it works. So let's start with a simple question. Have you ever really thought about this? Why is it that a court will look at a simple birth certificate, just a piece of paper or a digital file, and accept it as solid proof of someone's age? Where does that incredible legal authority actually come from? Well, the answer, as you probably guessed, lies in Section 29 of the new Evidence Act. This is the legal engine that gives all sorts of official documents, everything from birth certificates to land records, their amazing weight and authority inside a courtroom. All right, so let's break this down. We're going to start with the core rule. Why do we, and more importantly, why does the law have this built-in trust for these official documents? Okay, here's the legal language itself. But what does it actually mean in plain English? It means that when a public servant makes an entry in an official record, whether it's a physical book or a digital database, that entry is considered a relevant fact all on its own. It can be shown to the court as is without having to call in the person who made it to explain how and why they did it. And the reasoning behind this is actually pretty straightforward. You see, these records are kept by government bodies. They're put together by officials who have a legal duty to be accurate. So the law starts with an assumption, a presumption that these records are trustworthy and correct, simply because of the official circumstances under which they were created. Okay, but it's not like any old document gets a free pass. For an entry to be accepted as evidence under Section 29, it has to clear 4 specific hurdles, 4 legal tests. Think of this as a 4-point checklist. First, the entry has to be in an official public record. Simple enough. Second, it has to actually be about a fact that's relevant to the case. Third, a public servant has to be the one who made it. And finally, and this one's really key, they had to have made that entry as part of their official job, not just jotting down some random notes. So where did this whole idea come from? Is it a brand new concept for 2023? Oh, not at all. This rule has deep roots in India's legal history. This principle goes all the way back to 1872, where it started as Section 35 of the old Indian Evidence Act. The new law, the BSA, keeps that core idea alive in Section 29, but it gives it a crucial upgrade for our times by specifically and very clearly including electronic records. Now, at the very heart of this legal principle is a powerful, if slightly tricky to pronounce, Latin maxim. This little phrase is really the philosophical foundation for the entire rule. It means all official acts are presumed to have been done properly. You see, the law doesn't start from zero. It begins with the assumption that the government official did their job correctly when they made that record. It's a starting point, a default setting. But, as we'll see, it's not an unbreakable rule. And of course, the courts have weighed in on this a lot over the years. In one major case, Ram Prasad Sharma, the Supreme Court basically said, yep, these entries are admissible. Then, in Radhakrishna Singh, they cemented this idea of a presumption of correctness. But, and this is so important, in the Maduri Patil case, the court put the brakes on a little, reminding everyone that we still have to be diligent and verify the authenticity of these documents. So, let's talk about what really matters. How does all of this apply in our world today? A world that's quickly moving away from dusty file cabinets and towards digital databases. This table really sums up the evolution perfectly. The old 1872 Act, well, it didn't talk about electronic records because they didn't really exist. The new BSA fixes that. It brings the law firmly into the 21st century by explicitly recognizing digital records. The goal is the same, reliability, but the scope is much, much wider. And this is where the rubber meets the road. We started this whole discussion with birth certificates, right? Well, this rule also covers land records to prove who owns a piece of property, or a government employment register to show when someone was hired. And now, the big one, digital records pulled straight from official government databases. But we have to look at this from all sides. On one hand, this rule is fantastic. It saves a ton of court time and helps support digital governance. On the other hand, it's not foolproof. These records can have typos or clerical errors. And that presumption of correctness we talked about, it's rebuttal. That's just a legal way of saying it can be challenged and overturned if you have stronger evidence to the contrary. So if you remember just one thing from all this, let it be this. Section 29 is a powerful legal shortcut. It gives official records a huge head start by presuming they're correct. But, and this is the big but, it is not the final word. It's not conclusive proof. It's really all about striking a balance between making the courts efficient and making sure things are fair. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about, a really big question for the future. As we move deeper into the digital world, we face new challenges. With things like deepfakes and sophisticated cyber attacks, can we still assume that digital records are as reliable, or maybe even more reliable, than the old paper ones? It's definitely something to chew on as our legal system keeps trying to keep up with technology.
Today, we're going to talk about a fascinating piece of evidence from our new laws. It's something you see all the time, maybe even on your phone, but probably never thought about its huge role in a courtroom. We're talking about maps.
So let me just start with a simple question for you. When there's a serious land dispute, how important can a single map really be? I mean, could it actually be the one thing that decides who wins the case? Well, the answer is a big, resounding yes. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
All right, let's get right into it. आज हम discuss करेंगे Section 30 of the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam 2023.
Now, let's look at the heart of this section. It says that any statement of fact in a map that's published for public sale or a map made under government authority is considered a relevant fact in court. So what does that really mean? In simple words, the court can trust these maps. But why? Well, the logic is pretty solid. If a map is being sold to the public, any mistakes are likely to be found and corrected. And if it's a government map, well, that comes with an official seal of approval, a presumption of accuracy.
But hold on, it's not like you can just bring in any random drawing and call it evidence. No, the law is very specific. There are certain conditions that have to be met. So let's break down these essentials.
For this section to kick in, there's a sort of checklist you need to follow. First, the map has to be a published one, something that's available for anyone to buy. The other option is that it's an official map made under government authority. Next, and this is crucial, it has to be directly related to the issue in the case. And finally, it should show things you'd expect to see on such a map, like property lines, roads, or geographical features. Let's dig a bit deeper into that first condition. When we say published maps, we're talking about maps that are out there in the open market. The big idea here is reliability through public scrutiny. It's like this. If 1,000 people can buy and check a map, any big mistakes will probably be pointed out. This gives it a level of trustworthiness that a private, unseen map just doesn't have. Now, the second type, government-authorized maps, this is the gold standard. We're talking about official survey maps prepared by government bodies. These carry immense weight in court. Why? Because they're backed by the government's entire machinery, its experts, its precise instruments, and its official process. This gives them a very high presumption of accuracy, making them incredibly powerful evidence.
Okay, enough with the theory, right? Let's see how this all plays out in a real courtroom. This is where the law comes alive, where we shift from just reading the text to seeing it in action.
Let's imagine a classic exam-style scenario. Suppose two neighbors are fighting over their property line. One says the other's fence is on their land. It's a classic he said, she said situation. But then one of them brings a survey map from the state's survey department to court. Because this is a map made under government authority, the judge will see the boundary line on that map as a highly relevant fact. And more often than not, that map can settle the entire dispute. Just like that.
And listen, this isn't just a hypothetical. This principle is solidified by a landmark Supreme Court case that you absolutely must remember. In Ram Kishore Singh versus the Union of India all the way back in 1966, the Supreme Court clearly held that official maps are valid evidence for settling geographical and boundary disputes. This case is the foundation, the key precedent for this entire section.
All right, let's switch gears and focus on what matters most to you, acing your exams. What do you really need to know about Section 30 for the Judiciary and APO exams? Let's get into the key takeaways. Now this is a very important point, especially for your prelims. You need to know how this new law connects to the old one. So ये section पहले Indian Evidence Act 1872 का section 36 था, जो अब replace हो चुका है by the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam 2023. The number has changed from 36 to 30. But, and this is key, the core principle is exactly the same. The main change, apart from the number, is just that the language has been made a little simpler.
Please make a note of this. Judiciary, prelims और mains दोनों के लिए ये section बहुत important है. You see, for prelims, you'll likely get a direct question about the old versus new section number. For mains, they might ask for a full-blown explanation with conditions and case law. And for the APO exam, you can bet on getting a direct question, probably asking you to connect the section to the Ram Kishore Sen case.
Okay, before we finish, let's do a super quick 3-point revision. Ready? 1. The section is 30 of the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam 2023. 2. The core idea is that official or published maps are relevant evidence for geographical facts. And 3. It's extremely important for your prelims, mains, and APO exams. Got it?
And there you have it, a complete breakdown of Section 30. I really hope that was helpful. Remember, truly understanding why these maps are considered relevant is your key to mastering this topic. For more judiciary-focused legal content, please stay connected with us here at Genga Education. Today, we're taking a close look at a really important piece of India's brand new evidence law, the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam 2023. Specifically, we're going to unpack Section 31. Now, this is a rule that's all about making things simpler for courts when you're dealing with facts that, well, everyone already knows.
So have you ever stopped to think about this? How does a court officially prove something that we all just know? I mean, does a judge really need someone to take the stand and swear that, yes, the city of Delhi exists, or that a big new law everyone's been talking about is actually in effect? It sounds almost silly, right? But from a legal standpoint, it's a super important question.
And that's where Section 31 comes in. You can think of it as this incredibly smart official shortcut for the legal system. It's designed to save a ton of time and hassle by letting courts just look at trusted official government documents to prove these public facts, instead of going through this whole long, drawn-out process of formal proof.
Okay, so the key phrase you need to get your head around here is a fact of public nature. This isn't about, a disagreement between neighbors over a fence. We're talking about the big stuff, things that impact everybody. Think about the government declaring a new national park, a major policy change, or even the law that set up a public university. If it affects the community as a whole, boom, that's a fact of a public nature.
But, and this is a big but, you can't just use any old piece of paper for this shortcut to work. The law is super specific about where the proof has to come from. There's a checklist, basically. A few essential things that have to be in place before a court will just accept something as a proven fact. So let's break down exactly what those are.
All right, here's the checklist. Step 1, like we just talked about, it has to be a fact of a public nature. Step 2, the information has to come from an official source. We're talking essential or state act or an official government notification. Step 3, and this one is absolutely critical, it needs to be published in the official Gazette. That's basically the government's official bulletin board for the public. And finally, Step 4, and this is the modern twist, the law says that Gazette can be the old-school printed version or, and this is a game changer, an electronic or digital one.
What's really fascinating about this whole thing is that it's not some brand new, out-of-the-blue idea. Not at all. Section 31 is actually standing on the shoulders of giants, built on a really solid foundation of legal principles and court cases that go back way, way back. Actually, if you trace its family tree, this rule is a direct descendant of Section 37 from the original Indian Evidence Act of 1872. I mean, think about that. The core idea that you can trust official government publications as solid evidence has been a bedrock of Indian law for over a century and a half. So this isn't a revolution, it's an evolution.
And there's this fantastic old Latin legal saying that just perfectly sums it all up. Acta publica probante ipsa. It literally translates to, public acts prove themselves. What it means is that official documents, an act of parliament, a notice in the Gazette, they're trusted right out of the gate. They're presumed to be legit. They basically carry their own proof with them.
And it's not just an old saying. The Supreme Court of India has stamped its approval on this principle again and again. You've got landmark cases like Somawanti versus State of Punjab, where the court said, yep, you can absolutely rely on the Gazette for important public matters. Then there's barium chemicals, which use notifications to prove what the government had decided. And maybe most importantly, in State of Maharashtra versus Meyer Hands George, the court made it crystal clear. Once something is in the Gazette, that counts as telling everyone. The public has officially been notified. It really is the gold standard of proof.
Okay, so we've covered the theory, the history, the fancy Latin phrases, but what does this look like in the real world? Let's talk about how Section 31 actually gets used day to day in a real courtroom. Okay, picture this. There's a court case about, say, illegal logging in an area that's supposed to be a protected wildlife sanctuary. Now, instead of dragging a dozen government officials into court to testify, the lawyer can just walk in, hold up the official Gazette notification that declared that land a sanctuary, and say, here it is. That's it. It's clean, it's fast, it's powerful proof.
Or here's another one. How do you prove that a city's municipal corporation is, well, a real legal thing? You don't have to go digging through dusty archives. Nope, you just present the state act that created it. That single document is all the evidence you need.
And this last example is so fundamental to how our entire legal system functions. Think about it. A new law is passed, but when does it actually start? When can police start enforcing it? The one true final answer is in the official Gazette. The notification that says this law is in effect as of this date, that's the definitive word. No arguments, no confusion.
So, we've talked about how old this principle is, right? But the new law made one absolutely critical update. And this change is the perfect example of the law finally catching up with the 21st century. A real move from print to pixel.
Just take a look at this side by side. The basic principle, the same. The official sources, like Acts and the Gazette, also the same. But then you get to that bottom row, and that's where everything changes. The new Section 31 explicitly includes electronic and digital forms of the Gazette. This isn't just a small tweak. It's a huge, necessary leap forward that recognizes, finally, that so much of government business now happens online.
Okay, we've been deep in the weeds of legal sections and case law. Let's pull back for a second. Why should you care about this one little section in a giant new law? What's the real big picture takeaway?
What it all boils down to is a balance between two things: efficiency and trust. On one hand, the advantages are obvious. It saves the courts an incredible amount of time and effort by trusting in the reliability of official government records. But, and this is important, it's not a blind trust. The court still has a job to do. They need to make sure the document is authentic and be on the lookout for any mistakes. Because hey, even official records can have errors.
So, this whole journey from a 19th century paper-based rule to a 21st century digital one really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? Section 31 evolved to keep up with our digital world. It makes you wonder, as technology keeps changing everything around us faster and faster, what other fundamental laws are going to be next in line for a major upgrade?
Today, we're diving deep into Section 32 of the brand new Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam 2023. This section is super important, especially with the new legal framework, so let's get started without any delay.
So what are we covering today? First, we'll look at the basics of Section 32. Then we'll break down the key terms to make them easy to understand. After that, we'll see it in action with a practical court example and look at a landmark case. We'll also compare the new act with the old one. And finally, we'll focus on why this is a must-know for your exams. Let's get going.
All right, first things first. Let's get into the basics of what Section 32 is all about.
Okay, so as I said, आज हम discuss करेंगे Section 32 of the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam 2023. Make sure you remember the full name and the year, 2023. It's absolutely crucial for your exams.
So this is the main text right from the bare act. Now what does this actually mean in simple language? Well, think about it. If an Indian court has a case that involves the law of, say, the UK or the USA, how does the judge know what that law is? This section provides the answer. It says that the court can look at official law books and case reports from that country and treat them as relevant evidence to form its opinion. It's that simple.
Now, to really get a grip on this, let's break down the key terms. It's always the best way to understand any section.
So, इस section में तीन important चीजें हैं. First, opinion on foreign law. This whole section only applies when the court needs to figure out what the law in another country says. Second, authoritative government books. This is important. The book can't just be any book. It has to be one that is published under the authority of that foreign government. And third, and this is the big change, electronic or digital form included.
This brings the law into the 21st century.
Okay, enough of the theory. Let's make this crystal clear with a practical example. This is how you'll see it applied in a real court situation.
So, suppose there's a business dispute in an Indian court. The contract at the center of the dispute says that it will be governed by English law. Now, the Indian judge isn't expected to be an expert on English contract law, right? So what does the judge do? Thanks to Section 32, the judge can simply pick up recognized English law books or access official English case reports to understand and apply the correct law to that contract. It's a very practical tool.
All right, now let's talk about a landmark case. You know that case law is what gives real meaning to the words in the Act. Let's see how the Supreme Court has interpreted this.
The case you need to remember is Ram Sarup versus Munshi from 1963. In this case, the Supreme Court laid down a very important rule. It said that foreign law must be proved as a question of fact. Now, what does that mean? It means our courts are experts on Indian law, but not on foreign laws. So if you claim that a certain foreign law applies, you have to prove it in court, just like you would prove any other fact. And this case confirmed that using authoritative legal books is a perfectly valid way to do that.
Okay, this is a very important part for your exams. How does this new section compare to the old law? Let's take a look at the key differences and similarities.
Alright, so yes, पहले section 38 of the Indian Evidence Act 1872 था. The basic idea or the principle is exactly the same. Foreign law is treated as a matter of fact. But here's the game changer, the main difference. The old act from 1872 only talked about printed books. The new Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam 2023 is updated for our times and specifically says the source can be in electronic and digital form. This is a huge and very logical update.
Okay, let's bring it all together. Why have we spent time on this? Let's focus purely on the exam perspective now. How is this section important for you?
Listen carefully. Judiciary, prelims और mains दोनों के लिए ये section बहुत important है. You could get a direct question in your prelims or maybe a short note question in your mains. For the APO exam, इस topic पर direct question आ सकता है. And what's the most likely question? It's going to be about the key change, the inclusion of electronic or digital form. This is exactly the kind of thing they ask in new pattern questions.
All right, time for a quick revision. 3 key points to remember. 1. We're talking about Section 32 of the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam 2023. 2. The core concept is that official books on foreign law, including digital versions, are relevant. And 3. Exam importance is very, very high for both Judiciary and APO exams. Make sure you know this section inside out. For more Judiciary-focused legal content, stay connected with Ganga Education.
Thank you for watching this session. If you found this lecture useful, do like, share and subscribe to Ganga Education. Keep learning, keep growing and stay connected for more law lectures.